The following news flash is brought to you by the Lone Star Lowdown, providing your daily bulletins for the commodities market. Today in history, news updates, and the inside scoop into the tides of the alternative. Markets for Friday, the 22nd of January, 2016, are currently trading with gold at $1,097.53 an ounce, silver $14.02 an ounce, Texas crude $29.53 a barrel, and Bitcoin is currently sitting at about 380 U.S. currency. Today in history, Monday, January 22nd, 1506, the first contingent of 150 soldiers entered the city of Rome, marking the Swiss Guard's foundation as the Pontifical Swiss Guard. In recent news, Dwayne Walling, former mayor of Detroit, who in April of 2014 before local news raised a glass of water as he pushed the button connecting Flint River to the city of Flint's water treatment plant, setting into motion one of the worst lead contaminations of a municipal water system in U.S. history, said that he was deeply sorry for all the problems with Flint's water and that he regrets he didn't somehow find out more about what was really happening. The contaminant? High levels of lead, one of the most dangerous neurotoxins for infants, which leached from the miles of underground piping which negligence at city, state, and federal levels failed to detect or even incorporate emergency protocols for, as required under federal law. This at first turned the water brown, giving it a chlorine odor. As Flint residents began to complain about the color, smell, and taste of their water, state officials were dismissive, according to emails released this week by Rick Snyder's office, Republican governor of Michigan. Even while many residents were complaining of rashes, the contamination wasn't reported to the public for roughly 18 months. EPA Region 5 Administrator Susan Hedman resigned on Thursday, and Governor Rick Snyder, who appointed Scott Kincaid as emergency manager, who was responsible for approving the project, apologized for the crisis and is seeking $28 million in state funds as a down payment for fixing it. The plan was targeted towards saving millions of dollars for Flint residents by using the river instead of buying water from Detroit, at least until the new pipeline to Lake Huron could be built. After reviewing feedback from students and faculty over the past few months, the Wesleyan Private University Board of Trustees decided today that concealed handguns would not be allowed on the Texas Wesleyan University campus. President Frederick G. Slabach said in a brief statement that the feedback received from the members of the campus community was overwhelmingly in favor of remaining a gun-free campus. The Lone Star Lowdown is currently looking to fill some ad space. If you don't apply for a service you'd like to advertise with us, feel free to give us a call at 210-363-2257. This has been your Lowdown for January 22nd, 2016.
You're tuned to Truth News Radio Australia on the 23rd of January 2016. My name is Hereward Fenton. A great pleasure to be with you today. Well, today we've got a 2-hour show lined up for you, and we're going to be tackling one big topic for this whole 2-hour show. In the second hour, I've got a frequent guest on this show coming back, Jeff McKee, an engineer and a man who's done a lot of research in a lot of different areas. And today, Jeff is going to be joining us to talk about a phenomenon in Western society which has affected him quite severely, and we'll be getting into that in a lot of detail, and we'll be documenting his actual struggle with the legal system in Australia. But it's a little hard to know how to come at this topic because it can be approached from many different angles. And I'm going to use this overarching umbrella term, cultural Marxism, throughout this show, even though it's a term that is derided and has actually been denied any reality by many who are perceived by those who are not on the left as being left. And if that's confused you, just get ready because you're going to be a lot more confused than that as we get into this topic. Because we're going to be talking about cultural Marxism, whether or not that indeed exists. We're going to be talking about the impact of cultural Marxism on society, and in a very, very direct way, with Jeff McKee coming on board to discuss how political correctness has indeed changed his life and completely overturned and upset his life for the past 2 years. So let me just begin with my own summary of what cultural Marxism means and how indeed it could affect an individual such as the guest we're having in the second hour to such a degree. And I'll explain what it is and what those who say it doesn't exist claim that it is not. During the 20th century, there were a number of developments out of Marxist thought from philosophers, from theorists who were heavily influenced by Marxism, but were not strictly Marxist and were not particularly enamoured with the doctrines of Marxism and dialectical materialism as had been kind of systematised in the Soviet Union. These philosophers are actually generally grouped under the name of the Frankfurt School. And the men involved in this loosely defined school, the Frankfurt School, had certain things in common. I mean, they were almost all Jewish. They were also deeply interested in trying to apply a revolutionary paradigm to their own philosophical inquiries. I mean, these were people who were interested in changing the world, but they were not impressed with the way in which that was taking place in the Soviet Union. And they drew on a lot of different traditions, and one of the main components of the Frankfurt School is what is known as critical theory. And I don't have time to go into that in any depth, but let's just say it is a deep analysis of meanings and symbols within society from the point of view of critiquing what they really mean as perhaps opposed to what they purport to mean. Now, again, a lot of this stuff is just very heady and almost meaningless, and some people find it very frustrating. The word cultural Marxism is a word that has actually been used more recently, but it is a word or a term which is denied by Marxists themselves, and there is no active group of people who would call themselves cultural Marxism, but the term does denote something, and indeed is meaningful in the sense that the school of thought out of which this terminology developed was led by people who were heavily influenced by Marxist thinking, and they were interested in influencing culture. It's just that the people who have this label foisted upon them don't like it. And this is something we're going to get into in a lot more detail. But that's enough of my kind of rambling definition. I'm going to play to you now a video from a YouTube channel by the name of Thorium, a guy who's done quite a lot of research on this and is probably far more articulate than I am on the subject. And this short video provides a number of bullet points. Of course, they're delivered in a rather bald, kind of confident way that I think some of it needs to be questioned, some of it needs to be put under the magnifying glass. But it does actually make some very, very concise observations and is probably a good starting point for us to look at what this question of cultural Marxism is. And bear in mind, everything that we're talking about today is not purely theoretical, because we are in the second hour, as I said, we are going to be dealing at a very personal level with a problem, and it's not just restricted to one individual. There are many people who've fallen under this, fallen victim to what is purported to be an implementation of cultural Marxism. And we'll be looking at the direct effect on people within society in the second hour. But now I'm going to play to you the video by Thorium, and then I'll have some more comments about it afterwards. Here we go.
Let us begin with a very terse description. Cultural Marxism is a broad term which refers to the advocacy and application of critical theory, and more generally to the cultural, political, and academic influence of certain elements within the contemporary left. The roots of cultural Marxism are to be found in what is commonly known as the Frankfurt School. The term arose informally to describe the thinkers affiliated or merely associated with the Frankfurt Institute for Social Research at the Goethe University in Frankfurt, Germany, during the interwar period. Critical of both capitalism and Soviet socialism, they sought to address the perceived shortcomings of classical Marxism in the pursuit of societal change. Their work came to be referred to as critical theory. Defining or categorizing critical theory is exceptionally difficult, for it pertains to a broad, almost disparate set of ideas, individuals, and approaches. The underlying and enduring aspect of critical theory, common to all its offshoots, nonetheless, is the creation of interdisciplinary theories that might serve as instruments of social transformation. During the 1960s, the Frankfurt School critical theory gained traction with some segments of the left-wing and leftist thought in both Europe and North America. Today, its influence is felt throughout Western academia, dominating the social sciences and humanities. Gender studies and whiteness studies being two such examples. One of the most influential critical theorists and an original member of the Frankfurt School was Herbert Marcuse. A cursory glance at any paragraph written by Marcuse will set alarm bells ringing for anyone even remotely familiar with the current culture of intolerance on college and university campuses. Consider the following passage from his 1965 essay, Repressive Tolerance. The small and powerless minorities which struggle against the false consciousness and its beneficiaries must be helped. Their continued existence is more important than the preservation of abused rights and liberties, which grant constitutional powers to those who oppress these minorities. Social justice, feminism, neo-progressivism, and post-colonialism, to name but a few, are all movements inspired by or born out of critical theory, and thus all come under the umbrella of cultural Marxism. Be it gender, sexual orientation, family, race, culture, or religion, every aspect of a person's identity is to be questioned, every norm or standard in society challenged, and ideally altered in order to benefit supposedly oppressed groups. Classical Marxism saw class conflict as occurring between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, between the haves and the have-nots. Cultural Marxism views such a conflict as existing between the oppressed and the oppressors, between those with privilege and those without it. The working class has been replaced by minorities. Majority groups are typically defined as privileged and oppressive, with minority groups accordingly labelled underprivileged and oppressed. Heterosexuals are oppressive. Cisgender people are oppressive. Whites are oppressive, especially white men. Christians are oppressive. Those that do not fit into these groups are thus considered oppressed. It stands to reason, therefore, that if heterosexuals are oppressors, the solution is to encourage other forms of sexuality. If whites are oppressors, the solution is racial diversity. If cisgender people are oppressors, the solution is to encourage transgenderism. If Christians are oppressors, the solution is to propagate Islam. Theodor Adorno, another original member of the Frankfurt School, wrote a book entitled The Authoritarian Personality, in which he defined parenthood, pride in one's family, Christianity, adherence to traditional gender roles and attitudes towards sex, and the love of one's own country as pathological phenomena. This tendency to pathologize opinions and life patterns, which are not in accordance with its own political ends, is characteristic of cultural Marxism. Differing views are thus described as irrational fears or phobias. For example, a person who feels uncomfortable living as a minority in an area dominated by Muslim migrants may be decried as an Islamophobe, since wishing to live amongst those culturally and ethnically similar to oneself is considered sick and phobic. When Pakistani Muslims living in Britain, by contrast, show in-group preference, converting entire sections of a town or city into a mini-Pakistan, there is no sickness, no phobia, only multiculturalism.
20 years ago, there were no Pakis here, no one was doing nothing. But now, the Pakis are with a stamp, man, first, you know what I mean? That, think 20 years ahead, boy, fuck knows, man, this is going to be Pakistan. Oh, England, it's going to be Pakistan, man. They won't fucking ship it over.
A popular and propagandist manifestation of cultural Marxism is political correctness, in which media channels and social scientists make it a mandatory exercise to do the following. Question common language. Illegal immigrants, for example, are to be referred to as undocumented migrants, while ethnic discrimination is referred to as affirmative action. Their ambition to define and redefine words can be seen as a means of controlling the discourse and altering cultural norms.
This is Hereward Fenton, host of Truth News Radio Australia. You're invited to join the info war as we work to restore truth in media and challenge the dark forces which now dominate mainstream news. I'm calling on you, valued listener, to use your hard-earned dollars to help us smash the globalist empire. Visit truthnews.com.au and subscribe today. we're just playing you a clip from a video YouTube channel Thorium. What is cultural Marxism? And I'll just let that complete before I make a few comments. So just returning you to that video now.
Racism and sexism have been redefined as a product of prejudice plus power, which leads to such ridiculous statements as, "There's no such thing as sexism against men," and
"I, an ethnic minority woman, cannot be racist or sexist towards white men."
Maintain an unwaveringly favourable view of groups which are marked as being oppressed. Islam is a religion of peace. Black Lives Matter is a peaceful, legitimate protest movement. Feminism is only about equality, and so forth. No deviation from the aforementioned narrative will be entertained, ever, nor will criticism. While communism, as Marx envisioned it, offered the resolution of class conflict in a utopian social system, all that cultural Marxism offers is a desolate form of eternal warfare between ever more narrowly defined groups of offended minorities. The only meaningful consequence that its wide application could possibly ever have is the marginalisation of traditional European culture.
Okay, there we have it. That was a very concise and I think a really well presented little piece on this phenomenon. Now, I just want to give you my perspective on this. The Thorium's presentation does not address the controversy over the even mere existence of the term cultural Marxism as a semantic construct. And that is something I want to delve into more because what's really interesting to note is that there was a Wikipedia article titled Cultural Marxism, which was actually scrubbed from Wikipedia. And I've got a page here that links to the original Wikipedia article. And you can see that there was a time when it existed in Wikipedia. And of course, a lot of people turn to Wikipedia as a source of, what is real and what is not. But what you'll find now is that the term has been scrubbed as an article from Wikipedia, but it now links to a subsection within the Frankfurt School Wikipedia article, which is denoted as conspiracy theories. And this is something we've seen a lot in Wikipedia, where views that strongly deviate from the socially accepted norms and the versions of reality on any topic which is supported by mainstream media generally get thrown into the bucket of conspiracy theory. And there they merge with all the other conspiracy theories like aliens and chemtrails. And of course, people just roll their eyes when they see something as a conspiracy theory and are likely to ignore it. And it is fascinating. And there's another video I'm going to play to you which actually discusses the phenomenon by which this term ended up in the conspiracy theory bucket. Now, my opinion is that what we're seeing here in that video I just presented to you, this is a critique. Just as Marxism in many ways was a critique of capitalism, and just as critical theory was essentially a critique of many aspects of society, the term cultural Marxism derives from another perspective in critical thought, and it is a perspective in critical thought which is delving into a real aspect of what this school and Marxism in general has been up to in Western society for the past 100 years or so. And so I believe it has a right to exist. You may disagree with the critique. You may say it's wrong, but to completely deny it exists is just... it's not what we do when we're trying to find out the truth about anything. Now, the disciplines of critical theory, deriving as they did from men who were deeply influenced by Marxism and who were persecuted minorities themselves at a time when that persecution was the worst it had ever been. We're talking about the 1920s and 30s in Germany. It is not so surprising that these highly intellectual, quite gifted men used their intellectual rigour to develop a very advanced theory about the oppression of minorities and to think about how we might engineer a society to evolve in a direction where minorities are not persecuted in this way. And I think that's actually a noble goal. I don't think there's anything wrong with it in itself. However, what it has become is a purely impersonal, purely ideological perspective. And more than a perspective, it has become a force within society that leads to legislation, that leads to the government stepping right in and stomping on people and preventing people from doing what they otherwise would. So I'll just leave that there for the moment because that's something we'll probably return to a bit more. But I want to play to you now another video which actually gets into this Wikipedia debacle, because I think the fact that the term was scrubbed from Wikipedia is just something we really have to keep in the forefront of our mind, because it is actually very, very important and very indicative of what is going on. It's almost the scrubbing of the word cultural Marxism from Wikipedia is cultural Marxism in action. It's a demonstration of cultural Marxism, which is quite fascinating. It's almost circular. But the action that was taken in basically memory holding the term cultural Marxism is itself an act of cultural Marxism. And this is sounding more and more Orwellian, of course, as you no doubt have already twigged. But I don't want to get into that Orwellian train of thought, because then we'll just end up talking about Orwell. I really want to stick with this. So I'll play to you now the video from another YouTube channel where this very phenomenon, this what happened on Wikipedia, is being discussed.
All right, YouTube, a rather strange video here that some people here might not really care about, but others will. The topic of the cultural Marxism entry on Wikipedia and the very, very strange struggle that's going on literally as we speak on that subject. Essentially what happened is that some people, apparently either Marxists themselves or I don't know exactly what you would call these people, got the bright idea that it was a good idea to essentially scrub that article and get rid of it or redirect or merge it with a conspiracy theory page. Now, the reason given, essentially, was that cultural Marxism doesn't actually exist as a school of thought, as a philosophical sort of overarching school of academics or anything like that, and that essentially the term was simply a label given by the far right to people who were interested in social justice and other movements like that, as well as certain academic circles again. And I find this strange because on the first level, it really seems a lot like sort of, Stalin or one of these dictators from the past who would have people killed and then attempt to scrub all evidence that they ever existed from the world, from photographs to film reels. We have, examples of pictures of Stalin standing next to people who were then his friends, and then later they mysteriously died or disappeared. Nobody knew where they went, but then they stopped existing because those pictures were magically retouched and re-released, and the originals essentially destroyed. So that's the first thing. It seems very dishonest that people would be willing to go to this. Like, that means a Wikipedia article. It's some sort of weird culture war thing going on.
Fishing is a wonderful pastime. It's a terrific way to bond with family and get in touch with nature. But there's a scary kind of fishing you'll want nothing to do with. I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht, and I'll tell you more in just a moment.
Privacy is under attack. When you give up data about yourself, you'll never get it back again. And once your privacy is gone, you'll find your freedoms will start to vanish too. So protect your rights, say no to surveillance, and keep your information to yourself. Privacy, it's worth hanging on to. This public service announcement is brought to you by StartPage.com, the private search engine alternative to Google, Yahoo, and Bing. Start over with StartPage.
Phishing, spelled with a PH, isn't very sporting. The goal is to reel in personal information and compromise your account. The PH in phishing stands for phony. Phishing scams involve impersonating legitimate organizations like banks, and the bait is usually a phony email. A phishing email may ask for account information or provide a link to an official-looking website, but don't fall for it. Never email your bank account number, your user ID, or passwords. Legitimate companies won't ask you to, and it's best to enter a website address directly rather than clicking on an email link to check an account or make a purchase. Accidentally typing data into a phishing website could cost you thousands. I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht. More news and information at CatherineAlbrecht.com.
You are with Truth News Radio Australia, and it is indeed a great pleasure to be with you today. And I'm working through a difficult concept in today's show, one which is fraught with social conflicts and intellectual debacles, and that is this term, cultural Marxism. And we've been just playing another video here which explains how it was originally in Wikipedia and then was removed from Wikipedia and then placed as a subsection under conspiracy theories of the Frankfurt School of Critical Theory. So I'll just actually continue with that for a bit, and then I will weigh in with some of my own reflections. Here we go.
The second thing I thought of was I instantly thought about trickle-down economics. Now, this is something that is sort of the reverse of the term cultural Marxism, and this is why I think ultimately merging the article or trying to redirect it is purely biased. It's obviously politically motivated, because here you've got two examples where a claim is being made that actually the term doesn't actually apply to what it was meant to apply to, and it's primarily being used by the other side, the enemies of what becomes that label later on, to denigrate it. Because what people are saying on this article is that cultural Marxism never existed as an actual school of thought, and it was basically a term being used by the right wing. Well, trickle-down's very much the same way. You see, most of the time when people mention trickle-down economics, what they're thinking of mostly is any tax system in a real or perceived manner. It doesn't matter whether it's true or not. It's perceived as giving more of a tax break, more relief essentially to the rich. And it's usually been used in the past to describe Reagan's fiscal policies, as well as some of the Republican policies now. However, it's a far older term. It dates to the 40s. That's the first point. And second, people like Reagan have never actually used this term to describe their own tax plans. Essentially, the term was adopted by those on the other side, people in the Democratic Party, to denigrate what became Reagan's tax plan, to denigrate what became Bush's stimulus plan, as well as some of the fiscal plans that have been talked about in the House and Senate by the Republicans to this day. Now, those same Republican individuals would argue that this term doesn't really exist because trickle-down was never actually proposed, and the term was never actually used by the people who were proponents of those plans. However, in modern society, it's still part of our dialect. It is a commonly understood term. Whether or not you agree with use of the label, it's widely understood to mean something. The same as cultural Marxism. It doesn't ultimately matter if people espousing beliefs and views that would be labeled culturally Marxist by their enemies themselves don't like or don't make use of that term. It's still understood as standing for something. It's understood as standing for a broad school within society and economics. Now, as somebody who has studied anthropology. What is anthropology? Essentially, if you're talking about cultural anthropology, it's the study of human cultures. Well, if cultural Marxism doesn't exist, then why was I, studying Marx and all of these other Marxist philosophers in anthropology? Because these, again, even if you eschew the notion that the term has any real meaning, it's still studied, talked about, spoken of, and used as though it does in the wide society at large. Most people understand that the term is in use, whether or not they understand what it actually is supposed to mean. Of course, most people probably don't think of such things.
Okay, I just want to pause it there because there's some very important points being made here that I just want to kind of emphasise. When he talks about anthropology and its connection to Marxism, this is a clear indication that Marxism, which was a revolutionary mode of thought, it was certainly behind the Russian Revolution and certainly behind the Chinese Revolution, and certainly has been. It is a scientific, supposedly, view of human society, but one which presupposes transformation as inevitable. And those who follow Marxist thought see their role as being agents of moving society through those transformations. And so when Marxism becomes integral to a purely intellectual academic exercise such as the study of anthropology, then I think the word cultural Marxism becomes incredibly relevant. And this doesn't necessarily apply directly to the Frankfurt School. It applies to many different aspects of the way in which Marxism had kind of worked its way into academic disciplines, and there are a number of them. Archaeology, indeed, was heavily influenced by Marxist thought. And all of this has as its premise that society must go through certain transformations, and that Marxists will be acting as agents of those transformations. I mean, I'm kind of injecting that into this discussion now, and I'm pretty confident about what I'm saying, that is indeed that is uppermost in the mind of people who actually call themselves Marxists. They're not just passively, purely theoretical Marxists. It's impossible to be thus if you absorb the theories of what the way Marx perceived human civilization evolving. You cannot be merely passive, and these views were seen as being fundamentally true, that society would evolve through a feudalistic era, through a capitalistic era, to a dictatorship of the proletariat, to the ultimate communist utopia, which is kind of like an inversion of the order. You can't simply just be on it for the ride. You have to be in it because you believe in it. And I think this is the real danger, and I think the danger has been made quite clear over the past 100 years or so with societies that have veered down this path of using a theory to re-engineer society, and it leads to all kinds of excesses and all kinds of brutalities, as we know, and there's no need to go on about that in detail. But today what we're looking at is the aspect of that called cultural Marxism, by the critics of it, which is kind of a soft form of transformation. It's not a violent form of transformation, but it does involve violence. It does involve coercive tactics, which can end up essentially being violent. But it's done in a kind of soft totalitarian manner. Now, I'll just return you to the video because I think there's a few more important points there to be made, and then I will have a few more of my own reflections for you.
But the term has meaning. And to try to redirect it to a conspiracy theory page, I think, is rather dishonest. Now, I've had my own problems with editing on Wikipedia. I used to edit articles, and I don't anymore. Because I said the idea of consensus that they've built works well in some cases. In other cases, what it ends up doing is getting these little groups and cliques together, which will hover around a certain page, making sure it doesn't get edited in any way they don't like. And then they'll jump right in. And when you try to repair it and you try to discuss the matter, they will then have 20 or 30 different people, many who have been editing other articles specifically to become recognized on Wikipedia, jump in and oppose your ideas for legitimate edits. And this has been a continual problem. I had that problem editing articles regarding Satanism. I had that problem editing articles regarding Charles Manson. Because there's a great deal, essentially what Wikipedia really depicts is a consensus view rather than a view which is all-encompassing.
And we are just going to break you with Truth News Radio Australia. We'll be right back after this very short break for one more segment in the first hour. And remember, the second hour, we've got an interview with Jeff McGee coming up, which is going to contain some very, very interesting insights. Stay tuned.
Happens in terms of creating wars is a mind manipulation technique called problem reaction solution. And it works like this. First of all, you create the problem, but you get someone else to be blamed for it. You then report that problem through the media in the way you want it reported. You get the public to react to your problem by saying something must be done, this can't go on, what are they going to do about it?
Hi, welcome back. You're with Truth News Radio. And I'm going to return you to this expose on the debacle over Wikipedia and cultural Marxism. A very interesting little presentation here. And the YouTube channel, I can't actually pronounce the name, it's a rather long name on YouTube, but I will put the notes on there on our show notes so you can go and have a look at this guy as well, because it's actually quite well presented. And then I'll have a little more to say about it. I'm going to actually read to you an article from The Guardian, which takes the kind of reverse perspective, and this is the perspective that I've been hinting at throughout the show, which is to say that the people who are of the left regard the term cultural Marxism as a nutty conspiracy theory. And that's quite interesting to have a read of that as well. So just returning you to the audio clip here on the Wikipedia debacle, and then a little more analysis from me.
Essentially, for some reason, they've decided that adding an entry that is legitimately sourced, properly written, as in there are no grammatical mistakes or anything, fits in, adds to the article, adds substance, adds something of meaning to it, is not always actually accepted. It's almost like they think the extra 3 or 4 lines of text that you're adding with a couple of sources is somehow going to break their servers. It makes no sense. So while this sort of consensus building and discussion idea that they have works quite well for things which are not subjected to any real scrutiny because generally there's agreement on them, that is, that it's not going to start any sort of fight over a mere edit. For things like this, for something within the realm of politics, religion, anything fringe, definitely you have a lot of edit wars going on. It's been a continuous problem. And it doesn't seem to matter whether you're talking about a place, a person, a principle, a school of thought. And this is dishonest. There's no reason to redirect it. The article has stood for many years now.
Okay, I'll just leave it there. The author of that piece, he's making some very important points, and I've certainly discovered the same thing with Wikipedia. In topics that are divisive, topics that are highly controversial, Wikipedia becomes less and less a useful resource because of the strict consensus model. It's like if they can't find consensus on something, then it's like the meaning of that article is destroyed within Wikipedia. And the only solution that the Wikipedia editors or meta-editors seem to have come up with is to throw certain things into the conspiracy bucket, but which we know is actually a way of discrediting certain views by calling something a conspiracy theory and lumping it in with aliens and stuff. It is a great way of discrediting things. But of course, those who fall into this consensus view of things don't really see that as a problem. But anyway, we are sort of straying a little from the main topic. I'd like to actually read to you from the now non-existent Wikipedia article, and then I'll read to you from the Guardian article that I was mentioning before. Okay, so here we have the scrubbed, expunged entry from Wikipedia titled Cultural Marxism. Cultural Marxism refers to a school or offshoot of Marxism that conceives of culture as central to the legitimation of oppression, in addition to the economic factors that Karl Marx emphasised. An outgrowth of Western Marxism, especially from Antonio Gramsci and the Frankfurt School, and finding popularity in the 1960s as cultural studies. Cultural Marxism argues that what appear as traditional cultural phenomena, intrinsic to Western society, for instance, the drive for individual acquisition associated with capitalism, nationalism, the nuclear family, gender roles, race, and other forms of cultural identity, are historically recent developments that help to justify and maintain hierarchy. Cultural Marxists use Marxist methods, historical research, the identification of economic interest, the study of the mutually conditioning relations between parts of a social order, to try to understand the complexity of power in contemporary society and to make it possible to criticise what cultural Marxists propose appears natural but is in fact ideological. Now, as the man in the previous clip was saying, this is a very well put together article. It's grammatically correct. It has meaning. It seems to describe something that really exists in our world, yet this article was scrubbed from Wikipedia. Okay, here is now the ultimate debunking article, and this was published on The Guardian, and it's by Jason Wilson, and it's quite a recent article. It's from 2015, 19th of January 2015. The title is Cultural Marxism, a Uniting Theory for Right-Wingers Who Love to Play the Victim. The culture war that so defines current debates between the left and right sides of politics has its history in the balmy theory of cultural Marxism. What do the Australians columnist Nick Cater, video game hate group Gamergate, Norwegian mass shooter Anders Breivik, and random blokes on YouTube have in common? Apart from anything else, they have all invoked the spectre of cultural Marxism to account for things they disapprove of, like Islamic immigrant communities, feminism, and opposition leader Bill Shorten. That's, of course, a reference to Australia's Bill Shorten, who was, I believe, opposition leader at that time. What are they talking about? The tale varies in the telling, but the theory of cultural Marxism is integral to the fantasy life of the contemporary right. It depends on a crazy mirror history, which glancingly reflects things that really happened, only to distort them in the most bizarre ways. It begins in the 1910s and 20s, when the socialist revolution failed to materialise beyond the Soviet Union. Marxist thinkers like Antonio Gramsci and George Lukács tried to explain why. Their answer was that culture and religion blunted the proletariat's desire to revolt. And the solution was that Marxists should carry out a long march through the institutions, universities, schools, government bureaucracies and the media, so that cultural values could be progressively changed from above. Adapting this, later thinkers of the Frankfurt School decided that the key to destroying capitalism was to mix up Marx with a bit of Freud, since workers were not only economically oppressed, but made orderly by sexual repression and other social conventions. The problem was not only capitalism as an economic system, but the family, gender hierarchies, normal sexuality. In short, the whole suite of traditional Western values. Now, what he's saying so far is actually quite reasonable, and I think so far the author of this article is only justifying why we might indeed use the term cultural Marxism, because he's referring to the same set of data that the Wikipedia article referred to. Although notice when he chose to deride those who use the term, he didn't mention that it had been on Wikipedia for a long time. He only mentioned blokes on YouTube and a mass murderer as having used it. So again, just keep that in your mind when you read these types of debunking articles. Okay, moving on. He says here the conspiracy theorists. He just introduced the word conspiracy theorist there, with no reason as to why he would use that word, but he's now led with conspiracy theorists. The conspiracy theorists claim that these cultural Marxists began to use insidious forms of psychological manipulation to upend the West. Then when Nazism forced the mostly Jewish members of the Frankfurt School to move to America, they had, the story goes, a chance to undermine the culture and values that had sustained the world's most powerful capitalist nation. The whole story is transparently balmy. If humanities faculties are really geared to brainwashing students into accepting the postulates of far-left ideology, the composition of Western parliaments and presidencies and the roaring success of corporate capitalism suggests they're doing an astoundingly bad job. Anyone who takes a cool look at the last 3 decades of politics will think it bizarre that anyone could interpret what's happened as the triumph of an all-powerful left. Now, this is very interesting, what he's doing here, intellectually. He's basically saying because it hasn't succeeded, it doesn't exist. And his interpretation of what would be success is a little bit vague as well. He's basically just proposing that it hasn't succeeded. And he's also assuming that it would have to be insidious in a way that it's not. It's not particularly insidious. It's quite... it comes across. Those who have critiqued this cultural Marxism can see that it comes across in a very positive way. People talk about safe spaces. They talk about the need to free people who are oppressed. They talk about the persecution of minorities. These are all noble concepts. What is being done in this article here that I'm reading to you is essentially a straw man argument, and there is probably a fringe of people who do take the more extreme view that there is some kind of sinister, deliberate agenda going on to upend the West. But really, most of the people who are critiquing cultural Marxism are not saying that. Anyway, that concludes part 1 of our show today, and I hope that's been some use to you as we move into part 2, where we're going to look at a much more practical angle on this, and we're going to see how, whether or not it exists, how one man's life has been radically affected by something along these lines. So we'll be right back in the next hour. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Truth News Radio Australia. Well, in today's second hour, we're going to have a relaxed discussion. And I have on the line a long-time affiliate of Truth News Radio, Jeff McKee, a petrochemical engineer, a man with a wide knowledge and interest of many aspects of culture and society, and also with a background in science and engineering. Jeff is somebody who's experienced recently kind of a wake-up call in relation to aspects of modern Western society, which I think he may have been largely unaware of for a large part of his life. And he's come face to face with a type of political persecution which is unique to the Western world, in which we allegedly live in a society which champions all kinds of freedom and freedom of speech, and champions minorities and people who have views which may not represent the majority. And yet, despite all this, people in the West can be subject to forms of persecution now, which are themselves a product of what we might call the movements towards social justice and particularly philosophical, intellectual disciplines, which have strongly influenced academia to coercively affect the way people behave in society. And terms such as political correctness and cultural Marxism are often used to describe the new type of kind of conservatism and intolerance which we see in Western democratic societies, but that come from the progressive left and that come under the guise of promoting a just and free society. So it's quite ironic and it's almost paradoxical that the reality for some people and for many people who think about this and just ponder it is that we are moving towards a society which is becoming less tolerant and where small indiscretions can be taken and can be used within a framework of laws to make people become silent, to threaten people with severe civil penalties and even with criminal penalties. And of course, I'm talking about a whole range of legislation which comes under the framework of vilification. And we have laws that to protect minorities, which are laws against religious vilification and laws against homosexual vilification, to give two examples. And while it may seem that these laws, many of which have been ratified fairly recently, in the last 20 to 30 years, while it may seem that these laws have a noble goal, it increasingly appears that these laws are being cynically used in many cases as a part of a kind of a power trip of certain individuals who simply take them as an opportunity to flex their muscle and, of course, are cynically used by the legal profession to make a lot of money, because the court cases that develop out of such cases, when they do actually go all the way to court, involve a lot of legal expense. And so today we're going to get into some of that, and we're going to get into some of the actual nitty-gritty, into some of the meat of real issues, rather than just talking in generalities, as we often do on this show. Because unless you understand a real example, a real working example of a situation where a person has been persecuted under these legislations, you may just think that we are blowing it out of proportion. You may think we're exaggerating. You may say, well, look, these laws are there to protect people. You know, don't make a big deal of it. You know, how is it bothering you? And I have to say, well, I haven't personally been bothered by it. It hasn't interrupted me in my life. But not so for Jeff McKee, who now joins me on the line. Jeff, welcome to the show, mate. Reading you absolutely loud and clear. And Jeff, it is great to have you on board. Of course, you've been on the show a couple of times before. We've discussed peak oil and various other questions about important scientific and technological things. But, of course, your recent foray into the political world has taught you a lot of new things that you didn't know perhaps a couple of years ago.
Oh, yes, you're certainly correct there, Hereward. I think I liked your broad brush introduction here, where you were trying to see the big picture, you see. Yes. But I've been caught up in the microscopic area of persecution for maybe an indiscreet comment I made on social media, which has turned my life upside down and cost me thousands of dollars just for one paragraph comment on social media I made a couple of years ago. But in your introduction, you talked about these vilification laws. Okay, that's an interesting word, and I think there's three kinds. You mentioned religious vilification.
Yes.
And then you mentioned homosexual vilification. And, of course, the other big one is racial vilification.
Of course, racial vilification being a very significant one. Indeed, yeah. And of course, that there is room for new legislation to be brought in at any time because the concept could easily be extended. At the moment, there are only those three broad categories, but there could be new legislation brought in any time.
Oh, no, it becomes like a specific example here of a new kind of vilification with a different category of characteristic of a person is under the anti-discrimination law in New South Wales, Australia, which I've been caught by through my comment. They have homosexual vilification, and that was introduced in 1993 as an amendment to the 1997 New South Wales Anti-Discrimination Act. But what's interesting is that it was brought in by the gay and lesbian rights lobby, and after a few unsuccessful attempts in the New South Wales Parliament, it eventually got over the line, sponsored by the current Mayor of Sydney, which is she was a member of Bligh at the time. But what's interesting, Hereward, is that you've got a whole body of law built on this concept of the homosexual, but when you read through the law, as I have, and you're trying to find a way to defend yourself, I ask the question, what actually is a homosexual, and how do I know this person who complained about me is a homosexual? Because, you see, I cannot put in a complaint for vilification because I don't have the characteristics which are specified in the law. Because I'm a father and a grandfather,
yes,
and because I love my children and that, I would be seen to be heterosexual, which I am.
Yes.
I'm not apologising for being straight. And, in fact, I like being a man and I like women who like being a woman. But what's happened here, Hereward, they had to introduce a new category of vilification, which is transgender vilification. So now within the anti-discrimination law, there's homosexual vilification, and then there's another part of the law which is a repeat set of laws, but it's called transgender. Now, that seems to indicate that a transgender person could not actually have the standing of a homosexual person in order to put in a complaint, because it could be argued that a transgender person was not homosexual. So isn't it funny how you have to pick, when you pick one minority group,
yes,
then you've got to pick another one now. So now we have a whole body of law for transgender vilification. Isn't that crazy?
That is interesting. Okay, yeah. So what you're saying is, indeed, what I suggested was quite correct. Is that this has opened up so that this year it's transgender. Next year it might be something else. I mean, well, look, there are so many minorities in our society, so there could be specific law passed for vilification of Muslims, for example. I mean, just to give it as an example, at the moment we have a religious vilification law, but there could be a specific law passed in relation to vilification of Muslims.
Look, I tell you another thing that they talk about in the law. Now, I must tell you first of all, what is the definition of a homosexual under the Anti-Discrimination Act? Because you have to be a homosexual in order to put in a complaint under this law.
Yes.
Now, there is no test. Somebody could claim to be homosexual, but they could be anything. They could be asexual, they could be a pedophile, they could be bisexual, they could be transgender. You wouldn't have a clue what they are, but the thing is there is no standard of evidence, okay? Now, apparently when a bloke comes from Iran to become a refugee to Australia,
yes,
the first thing they do is say, I'm gay. I'm going to be... Right. Yeah, but then there's a different set of laws for the migration law. They say, no, you have to prove that you are a member of this cognisable group, you see, because anybody could say, I'm gay, I'm persecuted, give me a visa to your country.
I see,
But it's very interesting, under the New South Wales Anti-Discrimination Act, they don't define what a homosexual is. You look up the list of definitions, it just says homosexual. A homosexual is either a male or female homosexual, full stop. That's the definition we have, okay?
Circular definition.
Yeah, so this bloke who put in a complaint about my comment, whenever he's up there in the tribunal, he says, I am a homosexual man. And the reason he says that is that he has standing. He's saying, I have standing under the Act to put in a complaint to persecute this poor bastard, you know. Now,
and we're going to get into the details of that. I want in the next segment to try and just zero in on exactly what it is that you said that was so offensive.
Yeah.
And then we are going to zoom out again, and we're going to look at this from the perspective of political and philosophical intellectual thought, because you're now in the situation where you are feeling the rough end of our legal system against you, because you allegedly represent an abusive majority who is incurring pain and hardship on a minority within our society, and this minority, being the minority of homosexual persons in our society, is protected. Now, we're just going to break. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Very important show.
Okay.
Now.
Women of Earth, may I have your attention? This is Hereward Fenton, host of Truth News Radio Australia. You're invited to join the info war as we work to restore truth in media and challenge the dark forces which now dominate mainstream news. I'm calling on you, valued listener, to use your hard-earned dollars to help us smash the globalist empire. Visit truthnews.com.au and subscribe today. Radio Australia, and my guest today is Jeff McKee, and we are talking about the laws of the land that have been brought in to protect minorities and how they can actually end up being a blunt weapon to really hurt people who are good people, who are well-intentioned, who are operating in good faith. And Jeff McKee is one such person, and Jeff has been subject to a complaint in the New South Wales Arbitration Tribunal, and this complaint is from a man who read something that Jeff wrote on a discussion forum that the man concerned believed was vilification against a class of people, of which he is one, namely homosexuals. Now, Jeff, can we try to just briefly, can you just tell us what you said, just remember as best you can, and why it is that this has been interpreted as vilification?
Well, of course, you are aware of the background to this, Hereward, because it all came out of another one of your podcasts. You were speculating on a story, a horrible story about a couple of gay dads in Australia who apparently went to Russia and acquired a little baby boy. It turned out that these gay dads, they said it was a surrogacy thing in Russia, but it turned out they simply bought this baby and came back to Australia. I don't want to go into that story. You told the story, and it turned out that these two gay dads were presented on ABC Radio in 2010 as a lovely rainbow family, you know, and they were used to virtually advertise the perfect normalcy of two gay dads with a little baby, and saying that this is the way of the future and it's all very nice and they're lovely people. But to cut a long story short, these two guys were abusing the child, travelling around the world, and they were members of this pedophile group called, I don't know which one, I think it's the NAMBLA, you know, North American Boy Lovers Association. A horrible story of abuse by homosexual pedophiles who actually came across on radio as lovely, well-spoken men, but they were homosexuals and they were abusing their own child because of their twisted, perverted attitude towards sexuality, which is actually a psychosexual disorder, okay? Now, all I did, I read that program of yours, and I was overseas in Vietnam, actually, and I just, on my Facebook, something came in from a child protection protest thing. It was trying to remove illicit images of children from Facebook. There was a protest thing against the owner of Facebook he shouldn't allow these explicit pictures of children on there. And I made a one-paragraph comment and linked it to your radio show on these Russian gay dads, but I drew a conclusion, and I said there was a very dark and dangerous underbelly to same-sex marriage. And based on a bit of research I did, I said that in the homosexual male population, there's 3 times the probability that a homosexual male would be a pedophile relative to the same sample size of a heterosexual male population. That's all I said, and I put that forward as perhaps an argument against same-sex marriage, that, there is a risk here,
Yes.
And anyway, it was picked up by this celebrity person who calls himself a gay activist in Sydney, and and one day I got this big fat letter from the Anti-Discrimination Board of New South Wales, about an inch thick, saying that a complaint has been lodged against me for this comment. It appears to contravene Section 49ZT of the New South Wales Anti-Discrimination Act, in that I'm vilifying homosexuals by saying that they're more likely to be pedophiles, okay?
Right.
And then from then on, it's just been a nightmare. I've had case conferences, I've had 3 public hearings. The first public hearing resulted in the magistrate, who always was supporting this activist. It resulted in her recusal, which is disqualified on grounds of apprehended bias. And then I've had another big public hearing, which was almost like a court case, and a huge legal battle with me trying to defend what I was saying based on public interest. I was saying that I have a right to say this. This is my scientific opinion. And it's done in the public interest. And the fact is, Hereward, all my life, I have never been seen as a hater of any persons. I don't incite hatred, okay? Yes. And here I am, as the naughty boy, up in court, a person charged, not actually charged, but because it's the civil court, okay?
Yes.
But here I am, charged with inciting hatred. Now, that is just not me, Hereward. My comment was based on the opposite of hatred, because I, as a father and a grandfather, I have a great sense of protection of children, So basically I'm thinking about the future of these children who get purchased or manufactured for 2 gay dads of unknown and unverifiable sexual orientation. It's just a couple of blokes who want to have a baby, Now, that sends a shiver through my spine. And is that inciting hatred? No, it's not. But it's cost me thousands of dollars in legal defence and many submissions, and it still hasn't been resolved.
Let me just clarify, if possible, that your view on this is that you are against this in principle. You're not in favour of gay marriage. You don't believe gay marriage should be part of the framework of our society. You are concerned about the propensity for gay men who become in a marriage type relationship who adopt children. You're concerned that there is an increased propensity for pedophilia to occur in that context. Now, you are not saying that out of any intent, out of any hatred, and out of any wish to cause pain and suffering to anybody. You are expressing that view in good faith in the public interest. Is that correct?
Yeah, 100% correct, yeah. And I honestly do. You see, I sort of put a mother on a pedestal, yes. I see young mothers breastfeeding, and to me, it's actually a crime against children to deprive them, where avoidable, from a natural mother. To me, it's just something intrinsic in my heterosexuality that I just can't get my head around a baby having 2 gay dads and growing up in that environment without the breastfeeding and love of a mother, the bonding with a mother.
But
that's as simple as that, Hereward. And so
we are going to break. Sorry to interrupt. I've got some thoughts on that. Just stay with us. You're with Truth News Radio Australia. It's great to be with you today. I'll be right back.
home as neat as a pin, or is it jam-packed with stuff? I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht, and if you're tripping over things you'll never use but just can't throw away, I've got some advice that can help you streamline your life.
Privacy is under attack. When you give up data about yourself, you'll never get it back again. And once your privacy is gone, you'll find your freedoms will start to vanish too. So protect your rights, say no to surveillance, and keep your information to yourself. Privacy, it's worth hanging on to. This public service announcement is brought to you by StartPage.com, the private search engine alternative to Google, Yahoo, and Bing. Start over with StartPage.
Clutter. It messes up your space and clouds your thinking. If you're drowning in a sea of your own possessions, you may need to change the way you think about things. Simplicity expert Leo Babauta says clutter may mean you're holding on to the past, especially if you're keeping things to help you remember people or events. My husband and I struggled with a ton of sentimental baggage ourselves till we finally hit on a workable solution. Rather than hang on to that 8th grade chess trophy or that old guitar you played in college, take a photo of it, then get rid of the original. The clutter leaves your home, but the precious memory remains. I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht. More news and information at CatherineAlbrecht.com.
Rails.
Welcome back here with Truth News Radio Australia. And we're talking about some very complicated and painful topics today, as always. But my guest is Jeff McKee, and we're getting into the substantive issues of the case against Jeff McKee that's currently in the New South Wales Civil Arbitration Tribunal, NCAT, I believe it's called.
Yes, it's called the New South Wales Civil and Administrative Tribunal.
Yes. Now, and everything we say on this show is in good faith in the public interest, and I wish to emphasise that for anyone listening, and that I believe it's important to discuss these topics. And Jeff has been involved in this case now for a very long time and has refrained from doing many public interviews because he didn't want to affect something that was sub judice. But we can't go on like that indefinitely. This becomes a restraint on public free speech in itself if we are continually have to refrain from talking about matters when they drag on, as they have. And this has dragged on for, 2 years now?
Yeah, 2 years, Hereward, yeah.
Well, it's ridiculous. You know, we can't have a situation like this that drags on and that we can't talk about. I mean, that is just absolutely intolerable. So I'm very confident in asserting my right to be able to talk about this issue that you're involved in, Jeff, and I believe it's very important for you to be able to speak out on a public platform like this. Now, I've just got a comment about what you were saying in the last segment, that your views on this are very similar to the view, for example, that the clergy in the Catholic Church, that in institutions that are all male institutions run by Catholic priests, that they should not have the kind of control over the raising of children either, for the same reasons, and it also applies to female-run institutions, which have also been implicated in massive abuses. Church orphanages run by certain Catholic orders, run by women, have been found to be involved in horrendous forms of abuse, not necessarily sexual abuse, but abuse all the same. But when you have an unnatural scenario like that, when you have children being brought up without the opportunity of having a proper family situation, it's much more likely for abusive situations to develop. So what you're saying is not radically different from and I know many people are questioning the church's role and whether they should have these male-only scenarios in the church where they're actually raising children.
Yeah, well, I think you're touching on this worldwide issue of the Catholic Church. There are other institutions where this pedophilia problem has raised its ugly head. There was a fantastic movie with Meryl Streep. It was called Doubt.
I have seen it. Yeah,
that was sort of But what I find very interesting is this celebrity gay activist who spends all his life putting in complaints to the Anti-Discrimination Board as a way of life. Okay,
sure.
He's on a apparently he's on a disability pension, so he's on a mental disability, a pension for post-traumatic stress disorder, because I think 10, 15 years earlier he might have had a problem of being bashed or something outside a public toilet. I don't know, but now he's attacking people like me, perfectly good people, and other people. There was a grandmother in Lake Bolac who was running for the Katter Party, and some journalist put a microphone in front of her mouth, and he turned out to be a homosexual journalist, and he asked her about some discrimination laws, and all she said was, I would not allow a gay or a lesbian or a pedophile to work in my kindergarten, okay?
Okay.
That's all she said. And she was a grandmother and a Christian woman. That's all she said, and this same activist who pinged me put in a complaint about this grandmother, made a huge fuss, and it went before the tribunal, and she was and he won the case, and she was ordered to make an apology for vilifying homosexuals.
Right.
And it's interesting that she was vilifying homosexuals because she used the word pedophile and homosexual in the same sentence, you see. That was the vilification. Now, what's interesting, Hereward, is this is a very, very sensitive area, the linkage between homosexuality and pedophilia. This is what they're trying to desperately kill, because this is the one argument which, if it got out into the public during our plebiscite on same-sex marriage, it would give people a lot of pause for thought, saying, gee, we don't want to have a situation where, because you see, marriage, they say it's all about love, but it's really about children. And see, it's all about moving the goalposts. The first step is have two men marry each other. Then they say, no, we're married, we have a right to have babies, okay? So it just goes on, and then they have a right to go over to Asia or Nepal and pay poor mothers. And who are these men who marry? I mean, how do you know they're homosexual? They could be anything.
Okay, let's just pause there, because I promised I was going to take a bigger view of this in the show. And we don't have a massive amount of time.
No, look, I could talk for hours on this, because there's many other cases I've become aware of, and each one you could virtually write
But there we have your case, and there's enough detail there for anyone to understand your case, and we can easily provide more. For anyone who's interested, just send me an email and I'll provide you more information. But I want to now look at this from a more philosophical angle, because what we're talking about here, and as I framed this in the beginning, we're talking about legislation that's been passed with a sort of noble aim of protecting persecuted minorities. And you're describing homosexual males as potentially a persecuted minority, but you're actually hinting, and I think I'm extrapolating a little from what you're saying, but you're actually hinting at the possibility that at some time in the future, pedophiles could be seen as another type of minority which needs to be protected, because after all, they are a minority, they are persecuted, right? Everyone hates pedophiles. And this is where we need to, because this will really shock people, what I'm saying right now, because some people will be absolutely horrified that I'm even suggesting that at some point in the future we might have legislation in place to protect pedophiles. But why is that possible? It's possible because of a trend in our society which goes by this name of cultural Marxism. And I know that the term cultural Marxism is a term of abuse. It is not a rigorous term. It is not. There are no people who proudly call themselves cultural Marxists. There is no official school of cultural Marxism. It is a term of. It's a pejorative term which has been largely used by right-wing conservative people to classify those who belong to certain schools of thought, and it is a pejorative term. So I don't want to prop up the word cultural Marxism too much, but it is a convenient umbrella to look at, and we need to understand it, because the word is being used a lot on the internet, right?
Yeah, well, Herod,
there's a lot of YouTube videos where that word is bandied about.
Yeah, well, I discovered that this concept of cultural Marxism was invented virtually by the Christian right in America, who started to see a pattern coming out of this Frankfurt School of sociological thought, and so they then put a label on that whole gamut of sociological thinking, and they called it cultural Marxism. But I guess you could call it, well, could you think of a different term?
Well, it is interesting, because the term itself, if you Google it and you try to find definitions of it, they will all be very negative. If you go to Wikipedia or you just put it into Google, it will be described as a conspiracy theory. It will be described as a crackpot theory. That is the kind of official mainstream view of what that phrase is. However,
I guess the correct term would be something like progressive leftism would be a more generic term, would it? These people generally cluster on the left. It's kind of anti. Their big demon would be capitalism.
Well, here's the problem. I'm not against the use of the term. I just think we've got to understand how it's been seen and the way people are looking at it, so we're not taken by surprise. We have to understand the label and the stigma. We're just going to break. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
Okay.
Radio. Now, I expect we're going to have to do a lot of shows on this topic of cultural Marxism. Whether that's a valid term to use or not is perhaps something that we can discuss at length at another time. But it is a label that exists, and it does denote something in our society. And one of the reasons I think possibly why the phrase, why the terminology has appeared, is because the school of thought known as critical theory, or the Frankfurt School, is almost impossible to define. It is very hard to put a label on it because critical theory has no single set of views or attributes. Its only unifying feature of critical theory is that the people who founded it were mostly all Marxists, right? So there's one reason why the word Marxism is relevant here. The founders of this school were, for the most part, Marxists, right? They were heavily influenced by Marxist thought, at least. Let us put it that way. The other thing that they all had in common is they were all Jewish, okay? And this, again, is one of the few unifying threads that ties together critical theory. And I believe it's very important, Jeff McKee, that the founders of critical theory are all Jewish. Because, and I'll give you my off-the-cuff, I'm not a scholar, but I'm a deep thinker. Yeah. And these are topics that I've put thought into in the past. Jewish intellectual thought has been incredibly powerful in Western civilization since the beginning of the 19th century. I mean, Jewish influence in Western, particularly political thought, has been really, really powerful. But it's not the only influence. It is one influence, okay? And when we look at the socio-political movements of the 19th century, culminating in Marxism and socialism and revolutionary movements, what do we see? We see that a lot of the thought behind this comes from intellectual Jewish people like Karl Marx himself, right? And why is that important? It's important because we need to understand that the Jews in Western society have represented a marginalised minority, but which had a considerable amount of wealth and were able to be highly educated within their own institutions. And as outsiders, the Jews have been a kind of a destabilising influence, and some people would say a progressive influence on the West. But the meme of the Jew has always been the outsider. And the meme of the Jew is the minority and is the oppressed minority in society. And so this is something that actually goes back to the dawn of civilization. Well, it certainly goes back to the Roman Empire, doesn't it? I mean, it goes back to the expulsion of Jews from the Holy Land under the Romans. And so it's a thread that's somehow like intrinsic to Western civilization is this theme of the oppressed minority. And so is it surprising that this system of thought that we call critical theory was developed by a group of people who are predominantly Jewish, and that one of its main thrusts is to re-engineer society in a way to protect and elevate minorities. And I think if you look at it from that angle, maybe you start to understand why things have developed the way they have. Because these Jews, were very intelligent. They were very, very clever. They were highly educated. but they were also very disgruntled. They weren't happy people, right? They had a grudge. A lot of these people had a grudge. And when you've got people who are very, very intelligent, with a lot of intellectual clout and ability to influence people, coupled with a grudge, that's where you start to get something that can affect society in a way that is maybe not healthy, because it's driven by something that is a problem for that group or that individual, and not a universal solution to how we should, have the best kind of society. And what's your take on that, Jeff McKee?
I was just fascinated by your big picture view and trying to understand how this intellectual thought came in to affect my life so badly now. You're trying to understand how all this conventional thinking came in to attack people like me and many others I've come to meet through this. So what I gather from what you said, Hereward, you've got the two aspects. You've got the Jewish background and the Marxist background. It's very interesting that this guy who is putting in all these complaints, I learnt his background was in the Communist Party in Sydney University back in the 70s, so that would ring true. The Marxist side of things, to change. But it is fascinating. I remember Hereward on the Jewish side of things when I was at university from 1964 until 69. We were the intelligentsia, and people were reading all these books. And I remember Herbert Marcuse was a hip pocket book that we were struggling with. And that was all very in, Herbert Marcuse, all these ideas. Also, there was Erich Fromm, was another.
The psychoanalyst Erich Fromm, yes.
Anyway, I realise now that, taking in all these ideas, I was being brainwashed myself. But
the key thing, if I just interject, because it's really important to get this across to the audience, is that the key feature of critical theory is its connection to Marxism.
Yes.
And that's why I think cultural Marxism, the more I look at it, I think it's a valid term, because the connection to Marxism is absolutely essential, because these people, they wanted to change society, just like Karl Marx did. It wasn't just about analysis and criticism. They wanted to change society. They wanted to have a direct impact. They wanted to mould society. So this is just absolutely key, because what they wanted to do is influence culturally to change every aspect of society into
exactly.
Go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
Now, I just actually you took the words out of my mouth. I was just getting to Herbert Marcuse. One thing I clearly remembered that I thought was a puzzling concept is that basically they all hated capitalism when I was at university, right?
Yes.
Capitalism was the big evil, the capitalists, and of course oppressing the working class. But Herbert Marcuse, the problem with capitalism was it was so successful, and under capitalism you had all these happy people who found creative economic outlet, and it was so successful in producing gadgets and washing machines that how could they attack it? Anyway, Herbert Marcuse was talking about the concept of repressive tolerance, okay, that under capitalism they're so tolerant of people that it becomes repressive. Now, try and get your head around that.
Yes, and indeed. And there's a great little video which I will put up on the website. But I may play it at some point on the show here. But it's mostly text, but you've got to read it. But there's a very nice little video about cultural Marxism, which actually talks about this aspect that you've just described.
Well, no, then you can tie this into the homosexual agenda, because they have a totally and utterly different attitude towards sexuality than thousands of years of religious teaching, which says, hold it.
Yes.
Sex is a very powerful thing. It can result in babies. So we have to put the brakes on total unbridled sexual expression and have some controls in here. Now, I think, but what I've noticed, my involvement with the homosexual ideology, is that it's the opposite. They're trying to say that homosexual sex is no different than heterosexual sex, and their aim is not to have it just tolerated, but it has to be respected and celebrated as normal. And
it has to be elevated almost above normal. It has to be better than normal, because that's part of the idea of elevating minorities.
Yeah, but now
not just to bring them up to the level; they've got to be above the level.
Okay, now I want to link into the idea of repression. All this thinking comes apparently from post-Freudian thought, where you have instinctual renunciation causes you to be a very hung-up individual, right? So the homosexuals have seized this. They want to be who they are, and it's all about totally unrepressed sexuality, and you can see that in the gay and lesbian Mardi Gras. But what that means then, it leads into pedophilia, that why should you control your sexual orientation if you are attracted to little children? I mean, otherwise you might end up a hung-up person. So the whole big deviation here on sexuality is that all the religious thinking talks about self-mastery, okay, that if you have, that you should, a human being should... Whereas the homosexuals don't. They say, no, if you do that, so you should be allowed to do what you like, when you like, to whom you like. You know, and that is the different attitudes which we're up against here, okay?
We are at the end of the hour, Jeff McKee. It's been fantastic. And I think we're going to have to do this again because we only touched the surface.
Oh, only touched the surface, yeah. I think we're only just getting started here.
Yeah, just getting started, but that's the end of the show for this week. We'll be back next week. It's been great. Thank you, Jeff McKee. I'll be back with you next week. See you then.